And good evening and welcome to Out of the Bag. This is Sean Maguire live on Healing Oracle Radio and People's Internet Radio. And it is the 29th of the 1st, 2020, and I've got a packed show for you because it's a return of the wonderful Ken Scott, co-founder of the Panterra Private Contract Association, as well as the initiator of the Gemstone University and Media Alliance concept. This will be the second of a series of interviews that will hopefully give people enough knowledge and information to find themselves, to free themselves from the bonds that tie us to a psychopathic matrix of debt and slavery. We've discussed during this interview the Pantera Doro master plan and much, much more. I think it's going to be a great 2 hours. Get your pens and paper. And also, as I said, Ken will be coming back. It'll be a series of interviews. So hopefully we're going to also have some live interviews, not just pre-recorded when our schedules meet up correctly. With the time difference and everything, it is quite difficult. But hopefully we'll be having Ken on live at some point in the near future. And if so, and you have questions for him, obviously come into the chat room on People's Internet Radio. That would be great. But if you don't do that, email me on spmaguire at spmaguire@aircom.net. That's spmaguire@aircom.net. And also contact me on Facebook, Sean P. Maguire, and also Sean.Maguire651 on Skype. They're all the ways you can get questions to Ken Scott via me, and that would be really, really great. So in this, that's going to take up the first 2 hours of the show. It is a packed show, as I said, and in the final hour I'll be bringing you music from more bands that have been announced for this year's Rebellion Festival 2020. I'll be playing some great stuff tonight. Complete Dysfunction, The Sentence, Vulpines, Terminal Rage, bit of Ambition, Demolition, and UK subs, The Undertones later on. Stick around for the final hour of Rebellion Festival, and also check out www.rebellionfestivals.com. So that's the show for tonight. So why don't I just kick off straight away with Ken Scott's interview. Here we go. Welcome to Out of the Bag. This is Sean Maguire live on Healing Oracle Radio and People's Internet Radio. And this is a pre-recorded interview for my next Wednesday show, which will be on the 29th. And I'm very honoured and privileged to have back for part two, really, of his interview. And there'll probably be a fair few parts coming up in the future too. So number two won't be the last. But I'm so happy to welcome back to Out of the Bag, Ken Scott. Ken, are you with me?
Yes, I am. Hi.
Hi, Ken. It's great to have you with him. Now, obviously, we said the last times it was Ken of the family Cousens or whatever, but we'll stick to Ken Scott for the interview and maybe for this series of interviews. Yeah. And it's great having you back, Ken.
All right. Very good. Thank you. Good. Glad to be here.
Brilliant. So I suppose for the people that are just catching up, it would be great if they went and checked out www.outofthebagradio.weebly.com for my interview with Ken on the 1st of the 1st, 2020. So New Year's Day, easy to find, and a great interview. It really was a great introduction to the Gemstone University and Pantera PCA. So I want to say also to check out gemstoneuniversity.org and panterapca.org also. So I've got that out of the way straight away, Ken.
Okay, very good.
So what I've done.
How did you do with all that information I downloaded with you last time?
Well, there's a lot of information to take in, and obviously I want the revolution to start tomorrow and to everybody be part of the society. But I think there's a lot of learning curves to do. I mean, I had some personal questions for myself. You know, for example, what if it was Fred Bloggs and he had a job in a factory, and he came across Gemstone University, he came across Panterra Doro, and you know, found out all this information and really wanted to go down that route. Is he on his own? I mean, with all those people that are in the system around him, how difficult it would be for someone to unlock themselves from such a prison.
Yeah. Well, that's a very good question. The way I look at that, imagine you have a deck of cards, right?
Okay.
It's got 52 cards or 54 if you got a couple of jokers in there. Mm-hmm. And you stack them, you put them on the table. And if you take one card off the top and you try to go down the center of the top card, you're going to get a lot of resistance, right?
Mm-hmm.
You're not going to get through them. But if you slide that card laterally through the stack of cards as if they're floors in a building, you're going to be able to slip it in there. So imagine now if you took 10 decks of cards, you had 520 cards, or 50 decks of cards. You just have layer upon layer, and you can take a card and you can slip it in there, and you can move laterally into that level. So imagine those are levels of consciousness, and you could even say those are dimensions. A lot of people talk about multidimensionality, or we're moving from one dimension to the other. But in fact, there are thousands and millions, and perhaps we could even say billions of dimensions in this world, because everybody creates their own reality.
Yeah.
And when they have a certain combination of the building blocks of that reality, which constitutes their life. So they have a social framework, who they socialize with. They have a business framework, or an employment or a job framework. They have family components. They have, racial and where they grew up, whether it was in Ireland or England or America or India or whatever. They have social and ethnic and racial, all these things, and who they relate to within that relative dimension in which they have a relative stasis or balance, homeostasis, in terms of how they have created their reality, their life. And then there's the bigger, larger global narrative, the geopolitical narrative, the historical narrative, all the things we talked about last time.
Yes.
Law and money. How do they relate to money? Well, the guy you're talking about goes to work every day. At the end of the week, he gets a check. The taxes are taken out of that check. He goes to the bank. He puts the check into the bank. He has so much left over that is net, and then he has to pay his rent or mortgage and food and insurance and car payment and family support, and buy the kids clothes and send them to school. All those things, that constitutes the dimension reality that he's in. Now, imagine those deck of cards. Each individual card is actually made out of glass, so it's transparent.
Okay.
It's still solid, so moving from one level to the next has a lot of resistance. You can't just go through it, but you can look up and you can see it. See what's above you. You can look down and see what's below you. Now imagine that instead of dual transparency, meaning both directions, that when you look above you, it's opaque.
Okay.
It seems solid, but when you look below you, you can see below you. You can see to the dimensions below you. But the people below you cannot necessarily, or basically cannot see above them.
Right.
So your reality above them is oblique or opaque or obscured. You start talking about your reality and what you know and understand and what you've integrated in your knowledge of these things we're talking about: history, law, money, the world system, esoteric things, multidimensional spiritual realities, and so forth. Those below you are looking above, and it's relatively opaque. So when you talk to them, they go, "That's not real. That doesn't resonate in my reality," because they have not integrated all of that, and they haven't moved through those layers. Because once you have knowledge and you take the proactive commitment within oneself to, I'm going to educate myself, I am interested in these things, and I want to gather facts and start creating my own understanding and move through these layers that are opaque to me. And so Pantera, as a society of like-minded people with the intent to educate themselves and each other and support each other to gain that broader level of knowledge and integration of that knowledge, and working together in the Gemstone University, where we have currently set that up. That's a place for Joe Blow, factory worker or office worker, whatever, who is interested to go get educated, just like your show and the things you bring forward are parts of what is available for Joe and Sally and so forth, for them local, regular guys on the street who have jobs to start gathering that information. Mm-hmm. So the answer to your question based on what I just said is you don't just jump in and immediately start changing your job. I mean, changing your life. You don't give up your job. You don't, change your reality instantly. You must gather the information and you must integrate it according to what your individual, personal, subjective reality is. And as you do that, the floors above you start opening up. They start, the opaqueness starts clarifying. You can start seeing up there and it starts making sense. And the bottom line answer to your question is don't change your life or your reality until you've really established a foundation in both knowledge and integration of what it's all about and how it would work for oneself to change your life circumstances.
And as you move forward, it would create a new reality, obviously, which is
exactly.
Yeah. So, what support mechanisms are available for someone in that position? I mean, yes, you've got Gemstone University, and yes, that's a wonderful educational tool with information, etc., that you're sharing in there. But individuals, I mean, if they do and when they do, you're saying don't start changing your life straight away. The research needs to be done, obviously. But when they do, they've done their research and they are ready to take that next step. What is that first step? What is the very first step? Is it, where do you go?
Yeah. Well, let me sidestep that precise question for a moment. I'll come back to it. Let me speak about what I've experienced directly with a lot of people, what I've watched and observed with a lot more who I was not necessarily directly linked to, and what's happened in the last 20 years, 20 to 30 years. Well, I started studying all this 30 years ago, and when I started in 1989, 90, 91, it was built on a unquenchable passion to learn and figure out how this world worked. Yeah. So, I could go back the previous 30 years. I'm almost, I'll be 66 in about 45 days. Okay. And by the time I was 4, 5, 6 years old, I was definitely on this path of an unquenchable impetus to learn all of these things. So brilliant. I had certain things happen in early to mid 70s that were an awakening process. And then that opened a lot of levels for me. And then in 89 to 91, I started inching my way into the study of law and then money and banking and all this kind of stuff. Well, at that time, it was very few and far between people who were in any way engaged with this kind of pursuit. Nice. Well, fast forward about 15 years to 18 years into the 2005 to 2008 period, all of a sudden there's literally hundreds of thousands and then millions of people in this country and most likely around the world, but I was focused in the United States, that were being absolutely broadsided in their life, which was, losing their jobs, losing their pensions, losing their savings, being foreclosed, kicked on the street. In 08 to 2012, there was probably somewhere about 30 to 40 million houses foreclosed. Wow. So if you multiply that by an average of, say, 3 people per house, you're talking about 100 million people who were displaced and dispossessed, who were supposedly living the American dream, that they had all those things I said, a family, a job, a mortgage, a car payment, insurance, and everything. But they were sustaining it based on what they brought in after taxes, and it was all balanced out. Well, suddenly the entire floor was pulled out from under them. So that was this huge quantum catapult force that suddenly there was hundreds of thousands and millions of people who were wanting to find some answers. How did this happen? So that was a major motivating force. And for a lot of those people, there was no going back. Well, I've already lost everything, so I might as well rebuild my life based on an entirely different framework of reality and function and all the rest of that. So in the short term, many people got completely broadsided, but in the longer term, many would say today it was the best thing that ever happened to them. So for people now who have stability that maybe this hasn't opened up yet, it has to be done in a logical sequence that doesn't, you don't want to force march yourself to become, broadsided by your own actions, Don't take this information and walk into the office on tomorrow and tell the boss where he can shove it and walk out of the office.
Even if you'd like to,
So there are logical sequence unfolding that you can walk to transition. Now that being said, the parallel context of that is the people that were already very intently involved with studying law and banking money and all the rest of it and figuring it out, and who were basically on the front lines and the leading edge of the sovereignty law movement that was opening up in the U.S. and then it spread around the world. And a lot of them, and I think I may have touched on this last time, a lot of those people were very self-directed, very motivated, but they were also essentially only pursuing it for themselves. And the thing that I observed in walking through those years and observing all these things, what I just described as far as the collapse of millions of lives, and then the movement of trying to crack the code of what law was and how it was working, what was wrong with the system, and how can we create something. What I came to, and it was really consistent with my life purpose in the sense of what I was doing in my life since early years, was seeking solutions, not just onesies and twosies. Because a lot of these people who became very advanced and very capable in law, they found solutions that worked for themselves. But did it change anything? Did it do anything other than they were able to opt out of the system? And the answer generally was no. No, it didn't.
That was pretty much it, wasn't it? Yeah. Sorry. My goal, my objective was to figure out solutions on a larger scale, which we will, I suspect, get into during the course of this conversation, because it has to do with, what is a society? What is a private society? What is Pantera as a private society? And what have we created in terms of a model and the templates that are now in place, and certain other things are coming into place, manifestation, activation here very, very soon, that are going to give us, and when I say us, I mean the collective we, not just, that can include all the current members of Pantera, but in a larger context, us people in this world who choose to want to go from that fixed situation, as you started to describe, Joe, who works at the factory or the office, who starts waking up, starts educating himself, wants to know how to transform his life. Where can we go? Where is there a way to effectively do that on the larger scale that becomes a real solution that anybody who chooses to transform their lives, to essentially walk out of the matrix and disconnect from the bondage and the attachments that are sucking our life force out of us, that we're on a hamster wheel, that we have a job, but it's just above broke is what job stands for. And we're paying the man in every permutation, insurance, taxes, mortgage, etc. Anybody who wants to walk out of that and walk into life
and start living life without those forms of attachment and bondage, where is a collective solution that is available? And that's what I and we have been building since I started this 30 years ago. When I watched things happen in the 90s and I saw a lot of individuals who were very advanced do things that essentially were only for themselves.
Yeah.
A lot of them were teaching other people, but it was always individual. It was always, you can get out of the system, but when you get out, then some couple of guys in black suits and ties with dark sunglasses going to show up at your door and say, okay, you're out, but you can't tell anybody. And if you do, we'll come whack you on the head. That literally happened in a lot of, so the people who figured out was, okay, well, that's fine. You're out. Enjoy your life, but don't tell anybody because they're still our property, and we don't want you screwing with our inventory.
Is it a one size fit all, Ken? Is it does the model need to be tweaked for individual circumstances?
Both. There's generic, standard, universal components of how the bondage works, which we talked about a lot last time.
We did.
But it's an individual case-by-case situation.
Right.
Everybody's got unique circumstances in their life, and what we do in Pantera, and we've been building a consensus of now many hundreds of active members who have been going through this process, who are still moving through it. And the whole idea of establishing Pantera with its primary banner of a mutual benefit society is that someone comes in and receives the benefit of the preceding, all the knowledge and so forth that I've gained and I've now integrated onto the Gemstone University site, and then the practical tools and solutions. Now their lives have been transformed. Well, where's the reciprocity and the mutual benefit? Okay, turn around and help the next 5 people who are coming up behind you to walk the steps you've walked. And that's really what we've been doing now for 6 to 8 years, which is building the foundation, the knowledge base, the structure, what's currently available on the website, but building competency in people who are willing and ready and excited about helping others. And then it becomes a multiplication where one being who walks through and transform their life can now help 40 beings. And then we work with those 40 beings, and in 3 years, each of them is at a level of competency, and they turn around and help 20 to 40 more, and you multiply it. And we are at a point where Pantera is going to have the resources to greatly expand how we're doing that, how to support people worldwide to be part of what we're doing to, walk through those steps, gain that competency, and then become part of the solution and start leaving theirs and the collective problems behind us.
Well, now with all the work you've done, Ken, and those in the background as well, obviously with you, now is an ideal time for anyone who wants to join the Gemstone University or come in on the bottom level, if you like, to find out the information that they need to secure a great future. And I don't mind us repeating it. It'd be great to explain to people Pantera Doro is a private society, and I don't mind you repeating exactly what a private society is, etc., and what it does and what it can do.
Right. Well, let me first say that, and you had mentioned this before we started recording, that you had, for one, unfortunately, you had some trouble getting into Gemstone, into the member side.
I did, yeah.
For some reason, we'll figure that out. But you haven't had the chance yet to see everything that's built there. But we'll get that figured out in the next 24 hours. And then next time we do a recording or a live event, you can speak with authority of what you've seen and started to learn. Yes. What is available immediately on the two websites that you mentioned, on the Gemstone site, on the public homepage, there are two very, very important documents.
Yes.
And you mentioned one. One is called the Master Plan of Gemstone and Pantera. The other is called the Overview of the World System of Bondage and Separation from Life. So anybody who's listening who wants to start, I mean, those two documents will give you, the Master Plan is about what we've been developing and designing to begin to mobilize the actual implementation of building, which is starting right now, and I'll get back to that. That's the Master Plan. The other, the Overview of the World System, is exactly that. The rest of the title, the World System of Bondage. Mm-hmm. How is the world system designed so that literally every human being on the planet becomes attached by bondage? And in legal and monetary terms, a bond is an instrument of debt. Mm-hmm. And so, you've heard of on Wall Street and all the other stock exchanges around the world, that what do corporations issue? They either issue shares of stock, which represent equity, or they issue bonds, which represents a debt against the corporate assets. Mm-hmm. So there you have it, stocks and bonds. Yeah. Well, let's expand those two words. Stocks as in stockyard, the cattle who are stock in the stockyard, meaning cattle, which is chattel, movable property, as capital, the human population that's capitalized as stock animals on the plantation and held within the stockyard. That literally is the not so esoteric. It's pretty self-evident right behind the front focal point of, I can buy IBM stock and I own a share worth whatever it is, and I own a little pinch of the equity of that corporation. Bonds are issued as debt. So when I say we are all designed to be in bondage, well, what's the root of bondage? Bond. Okay, it's a form of debt. And in the vast global world system of law and money, that a bond that's issued is a commercial instrument. It represents an attachment to something of value that underwrites a form of debt. And so the bearer or holder of that bond is walking around with a piece of that corporation in the form of a claim against the total value of that corporation, and it's denominated in some numeric denomination as an amount of debt. So we are the collateral that is bonded in that form against the global debt, and through each individual national corporation, starting with the United States, but everyone out there, the UK, Australia, and all the other hundreds and hundreds of national corporations. And the people are attached, as well as the property, in a form of bondage against that national corporation, all of which were put into bankruptcy over the last 100 years. Yeah. And so the fundamental expression or detail of that, wording of that, is we are a bonded surety to a bankrupt franchise, because how we operate in the system is as a franchise. Our name that was created as a commercial instrumentality or a franchise of the national corporation into which we were birthed, that's our means to have Joe work at the factory and get a check every Friday and go home, put it in the bank and pay for his bills. And so that's what we need to separate ourselves from. So that document, the Overview of the World System of Bondage and Separation from Life, because when we're bonded, and the word surety, we're bonded as the surety, that means the guarantor. Mm-hmm. So every time anything is created in that name, your name, Sean Maguire, when you go, to the bank and get a loan, you get a utility bill, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, you're creating a form of debt, and you are the guarantor to service that debt.
The debt, yeah.
So that document, the overview of the world system of bondage and separation from life, because when we're in that hologram or that reality of bondage and debt and debt servicing and all the rest of it, we're separated from life. We are not truly in life, because the entire world system is truly and literally a cult of death. It's all built on principles of death.
Corpse, yeah, definitely.
Yeah,
and
it's a corporation. What is a corporation? It's the dead body through which we speak. We orate through the corpse.
Yeah, so we're definitely living in a bond age, if you like, and most of us are in that age, whether we like it or not. Can you explain equity to us?
Okay. Hold that question, because I left one thing out there, which was the master plan.
Oh,
okay?
yes, you did. Sorry.
That's the other document that we can, that anybody without being a member could go on and read.
Yeah.
And it will tell you, and for those who do that, keep in mind that the last iteration of what's posted there was written and posted or published 3 years ago. So the principles and the essence are very much exactly the same, but there are parts and things that were described in the document that have gone by the wayside.
Right,
some of the relationships or players, we talk about, people in the banking sector. Well, some of them have gone away. So keep in mind that a tremendous amount of things have evolved and progressed and integrated since we published that.
Right.
But it will give you a very good idea of what our game plan is, what our plan as a global society, as a private society, what we're both intending and now we are mobilizing to do.
Well, I don't know
so
how
later
Sorry, go on.
I was just going to say, later in this call, we'll come back to the master plan, talk about where we're at with that today, and what that might mean for anybody who wants to get involved.
Definitely. No, I definitely enjoyed
that,
reading that. I think it's very important that someone, coming to Gemstone University to start off with, I think that's a really, really good introduction to Pantera.
Right.
Absolutely brilliant.
So I'll come to equity in a moment, but then you asked another question: what does it mean to be a private society?
Yes.
So, and I'm sure we talked about this the first time, but as you said, it's good to repeat. So, in the most fundamental level of it, a society is when two or more come together. A married couple or a partnership couple of two people who decide to create a life together, a family or a partnership to live together. That is a society. They create children or they bring other people in. That's a society. If two people create something, as my wife Andrea and I did, we created Pantera as a society, and we invited people in to be part of it on the basis of mutual benefit, to create it together for reciprocal benefit, and not as a business where we're seeking to make profit or it's hierarchical and a non-equal type of relationship for people who come in. So we created that as a society based on the history in law, primarily English law, but it goes back much further than that. And it goes back to the Vatican and Rome and way back before then, thousands of years. This is a fundamental building block of where we've arrived today, whether it's on the secular side with governments or other bodies, corporate body that has a specific purpose or function, or on the religious side, such as the Roman Catholic Church. It calls itself a society.
Yes.
There's the Society of Jesus, commonly referred to or known as the Jesuits. That's a society. There's a corporation as a 501c foundation called the American Cancer Society for a specific purpose. So this is something that has evolved over hundreds and thousands of years in the fundamentals of how law forms and people come together in this world. And then emerging about 600 years ago, 1400s to the 1500s, in this place called the City of London, there were fundamentals of how that organizational structure started being put in place. And there were things called fraternities and guilds and liveries and basic functions. And they were actually, very practical things like the fishmonger's livery or
they all still exist today, don't they, Ken? They still exist. They still exist today, don't they?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
So they created societies that were built basically or function as fraternities or guilds or what we would call a union today, people of a certain trade. And yeah, they exist today. But is it about guys walking down the street with a cart full of dead fish and saying, hi, buy a fish? I'm part of the fishmongers fraternity. No, that was just the superficial front point. But those became the building blocks of the governing structure of the City of London. And then what emerged out of the City of London, underwritten and basically governed by those entities, was what eventually became the entirety of the global bar association. All of the bar oath-taking attorneys who took an oath to to something called the Four Inns of Court in the City of London, and became the global organization as essentially a society of licensed bar attorneys. And then all of the control of the gold system and the banking and so forth, those all emerge. And the City of London has its underlying governing structure based on those liveries and guilds and so forth. And that became the form that was exported to the entire world, upon which all religious and secular governing structures were formed. So every government in this world is a society.
Nice. And
so can anybody do that? Is that limited to somebody who's a recognized government? No, it's not. The answer is yes. Anybody can do that. And no, it's not limited to who gives you permission to be that. If you do it properly and in a lawful way that can't be challenged or doesn't have holes in it or whatever. And so I learned all this in the 90s, and by 2001, we formed Panterra as a private society. So it can be a public society like the American Cancer Society that first forms itself as a United States corporation, gets a foundation recognition, a 501c3 tax exemption recognition from the IRS, and then goes and does what it does. But you don't have to do it that way. You don't have to form it as a corporation. You don't have to get their permission to be a society. So that's what we did in 2001. And then based on that, what I knew as an absolute context to protect what we did was something called a private contract association, which is a form that I pioneered almost 20 years ago because I knew that in the United States, it's paramount, it's at the highest level of protections that the form of a contract cannot be attacked if it's a valid contract. In the federal constitution and every state constitution, there's a clause that says no state can impair the obligations of contracts. So it didn't say no state can suppress or deny the right to contract, but that's inherent in that. It says specifically cannot impair, which means to undermine the obligations of contracts. So one of the fundamentals of the building blocks of a valid contract is meeting of the minds, full disclosure, and consideration, meaning an exchange of value. If I give you value and you give me value, and it's relatively equal, and there's full disclosure, and we have a meeting of the minds, and you agree and I agree that we're happy with what we've exchanged in the contract, maybe you gave me money and I gave you labor or something like that, then that's an obligation of the contract. And no state in the United States, federal and all the 50 states, whether the original lawful form of the states or the corporate form right now, can impair those obligations. So if you create a contract association and the valid consideration in the meeting of the minds of that contract are sound, then no external authority can come in and say, you can't do that, at least in the United States, because that goes completely against everything that they've created. And there's a dual side of why they put that in there. Because when we speak of bondage to a bankrupt franchise, that's a voluntary status. We volunteered to be attached to it, and we did so by entering into a contract, and we receive consideration. We receive the benefits of being part of the public. And our consideration in return is to follow the rules, pay the taxes, and all the rest of it. So there's a valid contract, and nobody can impair those obligations of that. So it works on the public side, and it works on the private side. So that's why we're a PCA, which stands for Private Contract Association. And that's a form that people can come together rather than forming a public corporation. It's always a matter of that we can do it on the public side, create a corporation, create an association, do all those things in their side of things and follow their rules, or we can do it privately and create a private society and a private contract association.
No, it's brilliant. When I read the master plan, there was a little piece at the beginning, and it said foundations built on research into core levels of the true history and structure of the world system, how we arrived here, and to build a new world system. So the knowledge of what exists already needs to be taken into consideration, as they say, and then the changes that one implements, there needs to be some backup. I can't get my head around it. So going back to Joe Bloggs in his factory or in his office, will he still have access, if you like, to health, to the benefits that exist? I know that they're not great benefits, but the benefits that exist within the world system we have at the moment.
Yes, the answer is emphatically yes. But provisionally speaking, where I knew as an absolute, and I did know this a long time ago in my life, that I absolutely knew that we would come to the point of coming together with solutions, exactly what you just read, that we use the foundations of law and the construct of the world system, not to polarize with it and make it wrong or attack it or make it our enemy. And then we get into, the endless hall of mirrors and the dance of polarized battle, which is what their system thrives on. But we learn the law and understand the building blocks. I just went through one of the most fundamentals of that, learning that all governments and all religious bodies on the planet start as a society, and that there's nothing at all in any of that law form that says we can't do the same thing. So we learn that foundation and we build it on our side of the fence, so to speak. And
so they've set a precedent for us, yes? They've set a precedent for us, so that their model is really the model for any society.
Right, exactly. And so this is what I've been building with my teams and all the people and members of Pantera now for quite a long time. Most of the members that we have today came on over the last 6 years or so. We have members who've been around for 15 to 18 years. But for the most part, it was just Andrew and I from 2001 until about 2011, 2012, and then we had a small group came together, and it really started picking up about 5 to 6 years ago. But we so my projection forward from 20 years ago, which was built on certain key things that I knew at a very fundamental internal level going back 40 to 50 years, and I directed my life to start learning all the pieces. And so by 20 years ago, 30 years ago, then I started saying law, money, and so forth. And then about 20 years ago, I had enough clarity of how to do it, how to put it all together, and projected that trajectory forward, which now I know was like 20 years forward to this time, to build all of those, to gather up all those fundamental building blocks, rearrange it in a proper, lawful way that was not attached and was not under a hierarchical authority in the external or public system, and that we could start building this to get it to where we're at today. So to your question, can Joe Blogs, come in and be part of it? Absolutely. We have a lot of people who are members who have day jobs and, interact with the global community of Pantera through a platform that we use for chatting in groups and so forth, and working teams, and participate. In fact, probably the majority of members have one form or the other, because Pantera is not supporting them, so they have to support themselves. Some have jobs, some have businesses, some have more resources that they can don't have to go to something every day. But everybody's doing what they can within the relative level of that dimension that they're living on in that stack of glass cards. But by gaining the knowledge and integrating all of this, those glass ceilings above them are going from opaque to clear glass. They're seeing the levels above them. And then it's going from hard glass to sort of malleable, jelly that they can penetrate. And we are literally moving up, and we're moving as a collective body, in a unified field, which we can then refer to in terms of consciousness and multidimensionality. And we have really integrated that master plan in a lot of significant ways. And where we're at today in January of the year 2020 is that we have resources that are in hand and coming to us that are going to enable us to start actually building infrastructure. Because the ultimate answer to all your questions you've been asking, Joe Blogs, can he do this? Can he shift from a day job with a check and taxes taken out and everything to a complete life without bondage and everything? It would never and could never happen if we did not come together in a society, in a unified field, with the knowledge and the resources and the solutions that we now have. That's why I refer to the people that I watched in the 90s who were quite brilliant. Many of them became established lives that were free, relatively speaking. A lot of them went to prison first, and then they figured it out. But none of them created any sort of solution for a collective, larger whole. And that's what sets Pantera apart as a unique body for what we're doing. And
well, this is you've hit the nail on the head there. This is what makes it so interesting to me, and I hope it makes it so interesting to everyone else who hears what you're doing. Is that we need to work together to change the paradigm of I suppose destruction and death that we're living in, and it's up to us all to do that. And through societies like Pantera, we're going to get there, aren't we?
Absolutely. I have absolutely no doubt. And, as I mentioned a little bit today, and I'm not sure if I said anything about it. I think I did in our last talk.
Right.
But basically, 50 years ago, when I was 16, so it's coming up on the 50th anniversary, I had a quantum event, quantum opening of just kind of cracked my brain open. And I had a very, very experiential, direct experience of a knowingness of what was going to happen in this world that is actually now manifested in what's happening now. And I knew we would have two realities, one that would be basically going with all the billions of people who accepted and allowed themselves to continue to be bonded and have their minds controlled in the entrainment of this hive mind, sort of Borg mind, transhumanistic fusion of mind, man, and machine into where we can very well see it self-evidently where with that side is taking a lot of people. But concurrent with that is a bifurcation. We are separating from that. Those who are truly intending and directing their will and their lives to separate from that, they no longer will consent because it's voluntary consent. It was said in the Declaration of Independence by consent of the governed. So if you're consenting to the current form of government, let's say starting with the United States system, what everybody looks at as a beacon of freedom, they say, well, Declaration of Independence, Constitution, everything. Well, that declaration said government by the consent of the governed. So the government you are participating with is by your consent. So you are aligned with the Declaration of Independence if you have consented and are voluntarily bonded surety to a bankrupt system. You are operating and existing in consensual contractual agreement with that system. That system is going where it's going. It's taking whomever is continuing to consent with that. But conversely, you can sever that attachment. You can negate or nullify the presumption of consent by taking the steps to rescind the signatures that you attach to those contracts, revoke the powers of attorney that you gave to them to basically control your life, and you can unmake or terminate those contracts. And by doing that, essentially you walk out of the matrix and you walk into life. Yeah. And there is a bifurcation going on and there is a separation. And it's a conscious choice. And that's what I don't know if you've read the whole overview of the world system document, but essentially it goes into great detail of what that really means. And ultimately the theme and the conclusion is it's a choice. It's a choice between life or death. And every individual, every being on this planet in human form is facing that choice right now. And so we had to come together. We did come together. This has been the macro intent of many millions of beings for a long time, billions of years, to come to this apex point in the historical unfolding of this prison planet, and to come to that collective decision to cleanse the body of the parasite, because that governmental, that bondage attachment is nothing more than a parasitic life form that does not create anymore. It can only parasitically attach to living creation and derive some sustenance out of sustaining its form as a parasite does. But we are finally cleansing that, and we're healing the body. We're healing it in our own physical body, physiologically, biologically, by rejuvenating our health and all of that. But we're having to do that at karmic levels, emotional levels, mental levels, and so forth. And this is what we're about. This is what Panterra and Gemstone University is about, is providing the tools to clear that parasite out of your life.
So the most important, or rather, okay, what struck me is that it seems to be the most important module the Gemstone University, obviously calling it university, is education. We need to educate ourselves, and those that are educated need to share that wisdom and education with everyone else.
Right. Well, first of all, the word gemstone. I have always been a wordsmith in my life. Like we talked about last time, we read a couple of poems. Indeed. I've been writing poetry since I was 5 years old. And when I was in high school, planning to go to college, that's what I wanted to do, is study, educate myself to be a writer. So I've always been very involved with letters and origins and roots of words and how words work. And within all that context, I like acronyms. Letters are a word that is a word in and of itself, but each letter represents another word, and those words together make a phrase or a sentence that makes sense. So gemstone, for one, I was in the gem and jewelry and precious metals business from 1977 to, in certain ways I'm still connected to it. Yeah. But I love the beauty of the earth that's produced in the mineral kingdom, minerals and crystals and gemstones. So when we were naming our university, that's what we came up with, Gemstone University, because the word gem says who we are. Global educational media. That's the fundamental. So global educational media standing together, the unified field that we must be, our noble expression. That's the noble expression of the true human spirit, the being, the presence of who humanity has a capacity to return to through healing and rejuvenation and all of that. We are noble beings. We are truly extraordinary beings of grand and universal capacity to create in ways that are quite unique in creation. But we have allowed ourselves to be debased in our consciousness and our self-abnegation, which means to negate or to, lack of self-worth, all those things, and to buy into that program and to forget the nobility of who we really are and to project that nobility into this false thing that there's elites and bloodlines and royals and noble people that, well, they're the nobles and the royals, but we're just the pawns and the landless serfs and so forth. That's just a projection, because when we talk about parasites versus living beings, living creation, there's four principal things that you can see very self-evidently that you can tell what is the parasite. The first thing is that it's it or they or an individual is a master of mimicry. They mimic, but they can't create. They mimic life expression, and they're extremely good at it, but they're not creators. There's no substance behind that. They're only mirroring and mimicking. Secondly, they're pathological liars. And by definition, they don't even know they're lying. Like if anybody listening has been watching the circus in Washington, D.C., I entertain myself with watching it. And Adam Schiff is a perfect example of what I'm saying. He mimics as if he's speaking law in truth. He doesn't speak law in truth. He's an absolute pathological liar, and he believes it. I mean, he just absolutely believes it. And so those who are unconscious just get entrained to, he's telling the truth. Trump's a liar, blah, blah, blah. They're pathological liars. Thirdly, they deny it. They deny it in themselves, and they deny everything. You cannot win in a polarized argument because there's absolute denial based on the pathological line, based on the mimicry. And fourth is projection. Watch Adam Smith, watch the Democrats, Pelosi, and everybody else. It's not just in politics; right. It's in business. It's Mark Zuckerberg and all the rest of them. In corporate hierarchy, they project everything that they do, they project onto those who are actually doing it, who they're parasitically living off of. So, those are the things that we have to heal in ourselves, because we all are infiltrated with that. And that's part of pursuing the education. And that's part of rescinding the contract, so to speak, so that we don't see nobility outside of ourselves. There's no stars in Hollywood. The stars are in the skies, and there's no royals in London or wherever. We are the royalty. We are the living expression of the beauty of creation. And, so we are the noble expression. So that's what Gemstone stands for, standing together as a unified field, each of us individually and together as a whole, our noble expression, educating ourselves through global media, and building the platform for that education to engage and take the steps for self-transformation once we start that process in educating and open ourselves up to reality.
And can you explain living universities, because it's mentioned quite a bit?
Yeah. So so you're referring to the master plan?
Yes, I am. Sorry.
No, that's okay. You're allowed to interject things as you wish. You are the host, by the way.
Well, thank you.
Yeah, thank you. So the master plan is something that I wrote 4 and 5 years ago, and then I edited and kind of updated it in the last version, as I said. It was about 3 years ago.
Yeah.
But that was a progressive evolution of writing and rewriting and recontextualizing as we went through layer upon layer of our own process of formulating and progressively perfecting this blueprint that I had that quantum revelation or opening 50 years ago. And I've spent the last 50 years educating and integrating myself so that I knew literally how to make it a real thing. And so the master plan is what the purpose, the mission statement of Panterra Private Society is. And it starts with a metaphor, or it's a metaphor. The metaphor is a house. House has a foundation and floors. It has framing and structure that encloses the space for rooms and everything inside the house. And it has a roof. So that becomes shelter. That becomes a private, secure space. So Panterra, if you see it as a house, what is the foundation? Well, the foundation is made up of two fundamentals that are the a priori constructs of how this world system, as we have it today, how it runs and operates, and how it basically mobilizes concepts and ideas into real form, into manifestation. And it's what I call the parallel tracks of the railroad of the 21st century. So the railroads built in the 19th century were two parallel tracks of steel that carried engines and cars to carry people and cargo and to spread out through, the continents and build civilization and industrial civilization as we know it for the last 200 years. So what's the railroad of the 21st century, and what are those two parallel tracks? Well, the one track is data and communications. Everything today, we're in the age of communications. Everything is constituted in bits, which are bits that are carried as packets of information on fiber that carries light, so it moves at the speed of light. And that's data. We're in the data world, and computing and the internet and everything. So that's side by side. It's the same thing. It's communications and data. How do you create data? How do you store it? How do you transmit it? How do you protect it? How do you encrypt it so it's private? That's how the world system is carried, whether it's what we're doing right now, talking on Skype, or whether it's financial data or whatever. That is the backbone as one of the tracks of the 21st century of building the world that we're heading into. The other is our favorite thing, money and banking.
Yeah.
But what is money and banking? It's primarily data and communication. So, but what mobilizes creation? Money. In this world, it's money. And so everything about learning about law and history leads us inevitably to understanding, learning, and integrating how it really works, the money system in this world. But just like I described how we can take the public building blocks of the public system that controls us and create it privately, a private contract association, a private society, and so forth, we can do the same thing with money and banking. In order to do that, we have to have a backbone to carry it, transmit it, store it, and preserve it, which is data and communications. So we have been involved in the data world professionally in terms of as investors and interfacing with a lot of people, having been, for actually most of my life, I was born and grew up in California. And so I've interacted with, Silicon Valley. I lived in San Francisco in the Bay Area for many years. So and then we became investors in a communication company and data companies in the 90s. So I've known, and we've integrated that for a long time. This is a fundamental we have to have. And then the other half of it was learning law and history to understand and decode how money is actually created. So that's the foundation of the house.
Yes.
With that, we can build the framework. What is the framework? The framework is the real function. It's the people. It's educating the people. It's building many people into matured, knowledgeable, and capable individual beings who remove themselves from the matrix and have the capacity as well as the lawful standing to actually do things in real terms in the world. And with those things we want to do are projects, technologies, the things that are going to heal or remediate the environment and actually build new building blocks of new social infrastructure that is not attached to that parasite that's been bleeding off the human creative capacity and the nobility of human expression for centuries and millennia. So that's physical reality, that's mobilizing with the data and the communications and the monetary structure and actually doing real things in the world, building what we need, what billions of people don't have. They don't have housing, education, health, and all the rest of that. Mm-hmm. That's the framework of the house. What's the roof? The roof is the transmission of that knowledge and the continuing progression of what we're actually doing so that millions and eventually billions of people are actually synchronized and unified in both the ground floor, the foundation, and the framework of the house, and accessing it through what is the enclosure or the protective roof on top of it, and that's the media. So that is the basic of what our master plan is, which is to build a global architecture for a truly free system of media and to be able to carry the data and the communications on that architecture and convey it through the media, through the medium, and with that also to concurrently with that begin to build a new monetary system that is not based on debt or bondage or all of the things that have stolen the equity of this world by the into the hands of the few.
So are these things in existence? I mean, is there equity jurisprudence in your money system? I mean, have you got a money system? Do you print your own money? How does it work exactly?
Very good question. In order to do that, in order to do what I described, in order to do what you're asking, there is a fundamental that's required, which goes back to how law is built, which is contract. Everything is a matter of contract. Yes. All law is fundamentally contract. whether it's a contract between 2 people or 300 million people. If you are in the United States and you contract to the United States corporation and you agree by contract to the elements of the contract, then you are in that jurisdiction.
Right.
So when I created Pantera, and we have been building it as a private society, not as a corporate entity, not through the authority of the corporate body saying, yes, you can do this, but under our authority, under our own authority, that creates a jurisdiction. Because a society by definition also is, or not also, but is fundamentally built that it has its own jurisdiction. It has its own law form. It can have its own court. It can have its own banking structure, and it can have its own treasury, out of which can be issued a monetary issue. Wow. It's no different than basically American Express is a public society. It's a corporation. You become a member. And what do they say when they advertise it? There are benefits to membership.
Right.
So when you're using an American Express card, you are in their jurisdiction. When you walk through the door of Walmart or any other store on the planet, technically you're in its jurisdiction. So you have to follow its rules. And if it's a member organization, like, I don't know if you know what it is over there, but there's a big, retail warehouse kind of thing called Costco, and you become a member. And there's rules. But if you're a member, you flash your member card when you go in the door. You get to go in and do what members do, buy the stuff. And so that by definition is in effect a society. It has its own jurisdiction. It has its law form, which is you follow the membership rules. And, a lot of those corporate societies have their own treasury and their own monetary issue. You can join a club to fly in some society's airplane, and then you get what? You get points every time you fly. Well, that's a form of currency or monetary issue. So we have built the building blocks of that, which is the jurisdictional integrity of Pantera. And we are at this time also now stepping into a very significant, important strategic alliance with another jurisdictional entity, which I'm not going to talk about today, but I will introduce soon.
No, I was thinking that maybe Pantera needed to hold hands with other societies doing the same thing around the world. Would that not make them more powerful?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. Well, ultimately, who are those societies? Well, you can start with the fact that there's approximately 4,000 tribal units that are disenfranchised for the most part from the corporate system, and those are societies. Those are the original people. The native indigenous people in North America, South America, Australia, and so forth. We have a relationship with a kind of superstructure organization that has integrated, is pulling together many of those 4,000 tribes, and we don't like to call them nations because a nation is a controlled term. Let's just say that. But those are all societies, and that's what we are doing, and we are about to do is coming together with literally thousands of societies.
Brilliant.
And then others that are not per se the original indigenous people, and that represents 4 to 5 billion people on this planet. Okay, they've all been marginalized. They've all been genocided for the most part. They've all been attempted to be destroyed, and the reason is those people. And those groups of people are the original stewards on the land. It's the resonant relationship with being in a physical body that's made up of the substance of this earth and being in synchronicity and resonance and alignment with the earth and its noble expression, its divine life force, and what in many, many ways, all of what we're talking about is really getting to, and it's hardwired into the law system, hardwired into the education we do, hardwired into status correction when you sever that attachment and nullify the presumption of consent. It's all about returning to the land, actually putting our feet both physically as well as energetically as well as lawfully back onto the land, because the whole world legal system has been about lifting us off the land and controlling us in a containment field that then the parasite gets to say, well, we own all the land and we own all the flesh and souls of the bodies of the people, and we get to, operate on them as if it's our property.
Yeah, the history's very important, isn't it? So knowing about what happened in the Fire of London and knowing what happened about, what the British census did to people, and we need to know about this stuff to know that we're lost at sea.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. And that's exactly what we have. I would venture to say the most comprehensive and integrated forum for that education, to learn it in a way that is digestible and understandable, which is in Gemstone University. All the pieces, not necessarily all, but most of the pieces inside our educational curriculum are things you can find out there in the general internet. But the ability for almost everybody to actually find all those pieces and integrate them and understand how they work and fit together in an integrated whole, and then understand how that applies to you actually in your life, and understand how you can use that knowledge to transform and shift your life from Joe Bloggs in the factory to becoming a living being who has status corrected and standing on the land, and hence with that standing, real capacity to do something in real terms in this world. To integrate all of that, it hasn't been done. And that's what we've done on Gemstone University. Okay. And we'll come back in a minute, back to the master plan and talk about where we're going in the next phase of it.
Sure.
But that's what you just said is key. Okay, you have all these pieces of data. Okay, there was a fire in London in 1665, 1666, and then they created this thing called the Cestui Que Vie Act, and then you're lost at sea and you're underwater in the Sea of Commerce, which means you're in debt and you got to get back to the land, but you have an estate that you abandoned, but how do you reclaim that estate and make it stick? Exactly. All these things, they could take decades to figure out. It took me 25 to 28 years to figure it out.
Yeah.
And I'm a pretty smart guy. And I literally, I started studying law in 1990, 91, thereabouts. And I found the few and far between grandfathers and grandmothers of the movement in terms of opening up, learning about law in the early to mid 90s. And they were some of the most brilliant people. So I spent the whole decade of the 90s learning law, and I spent virtually the whole decade of the 2000s learning money and banking, and then
I must ask you, Ken, have you heard of Mike Montagna and mathematically perfected economy?
No, I haven't, but I'd like to. But hold on, let me finish that thought. So what I'm saying is, okay, I did all that. I studied with incredible mentors and all the rest of it, and I didn't consider that I knew what I was talking about until at least 22 to 24 years into that.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
So then 5 to 7 years ago, I had a sense that I really knew what I was talking about. And then even then, over the last 6 years, I've gone through layer after layer of integrating and putting it together, only to find a year or so later that, oh, wait, that has fatal flaws in it. Right. Throw that away, start over, rebuild it. So it took me 30 years of absolute nonstop figuring all this out to integrate it the way we have it today. So who has that time, and who has that ability? Virtually nobody.
Well, I'm just wondering also, Ken, sorry, go on.
Well, just to finish that, but you don't have to anymore because it has been done. So what took me 25 to 30 years to figure out is now integrated to where somebody, if they're, committed to it and diligent, can actually get their head around it and really understand it in 1 year or less, and then can implement it. Even if they're holding a full-time job, they can actually do it within a 1 to 3 year period to shift and transform and integrate the knowledge and actually apply it. So that's what our purpose is. That's what global educational media as Gemstone is about, is making it accessible and making it digestible so that one does not have to spend 30 years to figure it out.
No. And you also talk about a global media alliance. So I'm presuming that would be trying to shake hands and join hands with other media outlets throughout the world.
Yeah. Well, exactly. So I'll explain that, and that's part of the master plan, which is, so I talked about the house, the foundation of data and communications and money mechanics and monetary and banking, and then and the roof being the media. Well, look at what's happening to global media. It's completely going into the controlled hive mind, the social media and the control of YouTube, everything else. It's getting more and more into censorship and so forth. So there's no true free media in terms of what's on the internet anymore. Right. There's a vast amount of knowledge out there, but it's getting more and more marginalized and prevented from being accessible. Mm-hmm. So as I said, we do have the resources, and they're coming into hand, and we are going to start building the actual architecture to create a global platform that we will. And it's the key or the tool is decentralization. If you look at the control system of the matrix, it's all built on centralization. Central banks, central education, central media control, all of that. So everything we need to do is return to the way actually creation manifests itself, which is decentralization. So the platform that we know how to build, we have the expertise, top level world-class experts that are coming on board, online with us, is going to be a fully distributed, decentralized platform of physical architecture, hardware, and operating systems and so forth, software. And it's basically going to be a platform. It's going to be, as you said, the Global Media Alliance. And it's not just, professional or becoming professional alternative media players and groups and organizations, but that the alliance means every single individual wants to be part of it. And it's going to be designed where everybody can have their own channel and homepage, just like you would get in YouTube, but without that control and censorship, and structured so that, basically we'll have all the structure and benefits of YouTube and social media and other forms of media transmission and education and so forth, without the control and the censorship. So that essentially is a very key part of our master plan. Mm-hmm. And then the corresponding building block is, you mentioned, living universities. And what is that? That's physical land-based communities that will have as part of their physical structure and presence the media, the studios, the communications, the data repositories, and the education for learning and implementing all this stuff, and as well as in our law form in terms of our court and what we do to perfect the steps and the processes, we will decentralize that. We will have land-based communities throughout North America, throughout other continents and so forth worldwide, where people can come, as well as having healing and rejuvenation and all of that, so we can heal ourselves, heal our bodies, heal our minds, and actually come together. And essentially that is the Panterra master plan to build the global architecture for a platform of distributed media, and then physical points of presence in land-based communities that have all of the resources that people locally and regionally can come to interact and actually meet and work and grow and build together.
So are we talking a physical building, being put up in various places as part of the Panterra global network?
Yes.
Right. So you're going into bricks and mortar, in other words, and so you'll be employing people will be working within the system, the new society, if you like, rather than the system. So it's very exciting times, isn't it, Ken?
Yeah. Not so much brick and mortar, but hempcrete and bamboo and, but occasionally some bricks and maybe even some steel.
Well, I don't mind hemp bricks.
We have... Okay, good. I'm not going to go into it right now, but we have some very significant projects that are already on the books that we're working with several places around the world. Within or over the next several months, we're going to start being able to do some public announcements and disclosure of some of these things that I'm not quite ready to talk about today. Yeah. But over the next few months, this is an idea that is in the phase of actual manifestation. So it's not just ideas and, that's a good idea and, pipe dreams and stuff. It's something that has concrete grounding. We've been building and perfecting the law form and the jurisdiction and other components, as well as the means and methodology to get the resources, financial and technical and expertise to actually start making this real. And so over the next few months, we're going to be doing public announcements, and we are going to be looking for quite a lot of people with what I have described. People have become members of Pantera by donating Federal Reserve notes, which is what we needed to build and get to where we're at. Yeah. Well, that's actually going to change soon. We don't want, as the Beatles sang a long time ago, you never give me your money, you only give me your funny paper. We're going to stop taking funny paper, and the price of admission is going to be 4 things. It's going to be your being, your passion, your commitment, and your excellence. That's who we want to show up. We want people with actual presence and being, that they know who they are, or they are starting to know who they are, and they're moving towards that noble expression of their unique life expression and who they are. That's the being. The passion is what motivates and drives somebody. I want to be part of actually really, truly building a new reality in this world. I want to be part of healing the world. I want to be part of building something real and not just polarizing and yelling at my computer at the parasitic insanity of the old reality that is dying because the host is starting to expel the parasite. Mm-hmm. So that's the passion. The commitment is to be committed to oneself, to who you are, what you want to build and create, and coming together with people who share that and share the passion, all bringing their being and coming together with their commitment, and through and by that coming forward with and expressing their excellence, because everybody has noble expression as excellence that they're ready to bring forward. I mean, there's millions of people. Well, imagine all of those people coming together in a unified field, assisted by technology, with a distributed global media platform that they can interact, educate, and come together to work together, and then actually having the means to mobilize that relative to that thing that has controlled or limited our ability to create, which is called money, and being able to come together in a new way that money is liberated from the bondage and then becomes a kinetic force that we can use as money is designed or supposed to be, which is a medium of currency and a medium of exchange to actually create and build things, and that we can come together on that global platform, build locally, and communicate and interact globally. Well, that's the Pantera master plan.
Well, it sounds absolutely fantastic. And I did mention earlier Mike Montagna and mathematically perfected economy, and wondered whether you'd heard of it. Just to put you in the picture, I interviewed Mike, oh gosh, 5 or 6 years ago. The system that the monetary system, his usury less, because there was no usury in it. His system of mathematically, and it's in the name, isn't it? Mathematically perfected economy was looked at by a lot of quite wise people here in Ireland, and there was one flaw, and the one flaw was that it needed to be implemented by the government of the nation immediately, and replacing the other one completely. that was the flaw that needed to happen.
Well, that's a fatal flaw,
right?
Because for anybody who has studied the monetary system in this world and understands the fundamental that all money on the planet is monetized debt, see, people do not understand what money is, and when the word they don't,
but it is energy.
I use it.
Most people do. Sorry, go on. Most people do know that it's energy.
Well, yes, many people. I wouldn't say most, but many people do.
Okay.
But do they then and then the phrase is monetized debt. So do you understand what the word and the function is when you say monetized or monetizing? It means to take something of value and to create a monetary unit that denominates, as the man you're referring to, mathematically denominates how much value there is. So if I have an orchard and I produce 10,000 apples and I want to issue apple certificates, and one certificate is worth one apple, so then I issue 10,000 of them and I put the apples in the warehouse or the barn, and I go spend with those certificates, and people accept them because they know it's redeemable, that I can come to the barn. If I have one of those, I get an apple and I go out and I eat my apple. That's monetizing the apple. That's a monetary unit or a certificate that represents something that can be redeemed. And so when you're talking about monetized debt, it means that every unit of monetary issue, every dollar, Federal Reserve note, every euro or British pound or Swiss franc or Japanese yen, those are monetary units. If it's monetized debt, that means that every single one of those units has debt behind it, which then means that if you were to ask every person on this planet who is in the monetary system, and of course there's billions who aren't, but everyone who's in it, and almost all of them are in debt. So if you were to ask them, would you like to be out of debt? Absolutely. Okay. Would you like every member of your family, your uncles and aunts and brothers? Oh yeah, absolutely. How about your neighbors? Well, yeah, I'd like them to be out of debt too. Well, how about everybody in your county or your state? Well, I suppose, or some people say, well, I don't care about that. But the bottom line is, if I want to be out of debt, why shouldn't everybody else be out of debt? And if as a global society, what we really want is a debt-free world and a debt-free money system. But the problem is that if all the debt that currently is monetized on this planet, if all that was paid off, do you know where we would be at?
Go on.
We'd have no money. Because if it's all monetized debt, you cannot be out of debt.
Well, I do wish, I do hope that you check out Mike Montagna and check out Mathematically Perfected Economy. It might actually fit the bill. I mean, I haven't done it justice because I haven't explained it at all,
Yeah. But no, I understand. And yeah, send me a link in Skype when we're done, and I'll have a look at it. And see, people understand a lot of that. I'm sure that it sounds like he's quite brilliant in what he's created, but there's a flaw in that. One of the flaws is, okay, the governments of the world have to adopt this and get rid of the rest of it. But that's what I'm trying to say, that if all the debt on the planet disappeared overnight, there'd be no money. That would be a cataclysmic collapse of the entire system with nothing to replace it. So we have to go through a transition phase of reducing what's out there now as a circulating medium or currency that we call money. It circulates and it's a medium of exchange that we can buy things with it. Well, we have to reduce that to eventually get to the point where all that debt is disappeared. But we then concurrently, we have to build a new monetary basis that's not debt-based, that replaces it. So for every dollar in debt we take out of the system, we need to replace it with at least one unit that's equivalent to that dollar but doesn't have debt attached to it.
Yeah.
So how do you do that? That's the question. And we do have the answer to that.
Great.
But it's going to take a lot of people, a lot of time to educate them, and a progression to implement it.
Okay, well, I actually think that MPE, I looked at it years ago and I thought not that every government needs to do it, but that a nation chooses one government, singular. It can be singular, and it can stand alone and would have its own denomination, of course, But anyway.
Well, what if that one nation that does that is a private society that's globally deployed and has its own jurisdiction where it's lawfully capable of doing that and starts building that?
Then that's why I've mentioned MPE to you, because I think it's a great idea, and the two ideas of the society plus that would marry well, I think.
Right. So, and a lot of people listening to this will think in their head, well, that sounds like cryptocurrency. Well, yes and no. There are certain building blocks out of the cryptocurrency and the digital technology that's out there that will be part of it, but not entirely, because where most of the cryptosphere has gone and essentially been forced to go to, it's all been co-opted back to the controlled monetary system. And it would take us too long to go into that on this call, but we might talk about it next time.
Yeah.
But these are the sort of things that you cannot create a fragmented part of a solution, even if that fragment makes complete sense, fully integrated, and in and of itself is functional. Well, if it doesn't fit with an entire solution structure that is comprehensive, that can also exist within the current system without being, blocked or destroyed, but can be built over time to increase over in strength and context and volume, while the other system is being progressively removed or diminished, well, then that's a real solution. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. That's how we have to approach this. It has to be a whole system solution, not a fragment, because those fragments become only good for a small portion. There's people who've made millions in the Bitcoin phenomenon.
Yes.
But did that really change the world? No.
So are there financial...
So that's what I have always been.
I was going to say, so are there financial institutions that are going to support your society, or do you have to build them? I mean, is there a bank that will say, right, we'll take your way of doing things, and now we won't prioritize fiat currency. We'll use your currency, for example. Is that on the horizon?
Yes, but it's not as two-dimensional as that. It'll take time to understand it, but basically,
well, you could explain it if you wish, Ken. Well, you can explain it if you wish.
Say again.
You can explain it if you wish. Yeah.
Okay. Well, then we'd need another 8 hours to go.
Right, okay.
But let's say this, you had commented before we started recording that, well, we're going to probably have at least 5 or 6 more of these conversations. Well, this is where we're going together, Sean, is building a platform or a foundation to progressively build towards more complex answers to what you're asking. So yes, I can explain it, and I can do it over a course of, whatever number. Say we end up having a conversation once a month for the course of this year. By the end of the year, we will have answered that and many other questions, and build a comprehensive whole of how that would work. But the clue to the question, is there a bank or banks that would do that? Well, I just told you what that is. That's the Global Media Alliance. That's that platform, because what are we talking about? Back to the house. The fundamental of those two parallel tracks. One is communications and data. The other is banking and money. Well, what is banking and money today? Communications and data. So if we have a private jurisdiction with its own global platform on a distributed model that carries communications and data and secures it and does that properly, and it's within its own private, lawfully recognized, lawfully secure and protected jurisdiction, that by definition is the answer to your question. That becomes the bank.
Sure, right. Okay, understood. So, okay, we've got about, I suppose, just over 10 minutes left of the interview for this month. Hopefully we will have next month.
Okay.
The one question that has been brought up by a couple of people that have looked at the Gemstone University website is the part of it being an ecclesiastical society. And can that be, in the next 10 minutes, can that be, I suppose, expounded on and explained why it is such?
Yeah. That's an extremely important and a very top priority question and answer, and absolutely I can explain that. And it's a good rounding off of everything we've talked about in this conversation, because you asked a question earlier on, which we answered, which is, well, what is a private society? And then I explained that where that came from, where it is embedded foundationally into the global law form in English law that has become the foundation of law in the Western model, and that includes the law and banking system and so forth. And that there are societies which are either religious as churches, religious entities, and or secular in terms of government. They all start, and fundamentally their foundation is as a society. So then here's this question. Well, Pantera says it's an ecclesiastical body politic, which is the specific phrase that I use. Well, if I go to my dictionary and I look up the word ecclesiastical, what does it say? It says it is generally considered to be of a Christian denomination and of a religious doctrine within the general Christian religion.
Yes.
Well, that's an interesting definition, and that's what most people think it is. Well, why is it that way in the dictionary? Well, for one, all the dictionaries on the planet that are published are owned by a very small number of publishing houses. Yes. In the United States, all the law books, from all this books that hold all the statutes for every state, and all the Supreme Court case decisions going back over 200 years, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, they're owned by a company called West Publishing.
Okay.
And that includes all the law dictionaries. And who owns West Publishing? Well, it's owned by, originally it was owned by a company called Reuters. R-E-U-T-E, Reuters, that's what it is. Like Reuters. And then it merged with a company called Thomas, which goes back to, Thomas atlases and travel and, all that thing. So it's now Thomas Reuters. Now they own West Publishing. Well, do you know who owns Reuters, who actually founded it in the 1850s. It's a little family called the Rothschilds.
Yeah.
So, and if you look in all those law dictionaries and law books and so forth, you open up the first few pages, as any book that's published, it will give you its basic information, including the copyright. And the copyright is owned by West Publishing. Well, that's a private copyright. Is it public law or is it private copyrighted material? Well, if I want to use somebody's copyrighted material, I have to get their permission and I have to pay them for it if they say I have to pay for it, right?
Yeah.
So West Publishing, owned through a couple of intermediary companies, back to Rothschilds, owns the copyright of all the law books, which means all the law essentially in the public in the United States and probably worldwide. I haven't looked at it worldwide. So let's look back at, or look in present time to Webster's dictionary and or other, non-law dictionaries.
Yeah, like Collins.
I'm sure they too.
Yeah, like Webster's and Collins. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So same thing. Private copyrighted material. Mm-hmm. Who creates those words and definitions? Well, whoever owns the copyright, whoever published it. If you look at Webster's in 1828, when Daniel Webster first published it, versus in 2020, it's going to be vastly different. So words have been changed a lot. And our friends, the Catholic Church, owns a lot of that as well, in partnership or strategic alliance with Rothschilds and all the other fun guys on the planet. Mm-hmm. So it's their definition of the word ecclesiastical to narrowly define it as a religious term relative to, how most people would think about it, which is why people are asking you that question. Mm-hmm. And so at the same time, as I said, that all governments are primarily or start as a society, they are also ecclesiastical bodies politic. Mm-hmm. They are all ecclesiastical, which means ultimately they are a religious body. And when you peel back the layer of the seeming public secular form of a government, you can peel it back and you will discover ultimately the Catholic Church behind every one of them. Mm-hmm. So in their sandbox, with all their toys that they control because it's their sandbox, ecclesiastical means what they say in their controlled dictionaries and their forms and governments and all the rest of it. But the word ecclesiastical comes from a root etymologically, which means the study of words and the roots or origins of where a word comes from. Comes from a Greek word which means which is ecclesia, EKKLESIA. And the definition of an ecclesia is it can be generically called the body of the congregation, meaning those who congregate, who come together. And then people say, well, a congregation is a religious group that goes to church. Well, not really. Not necessarily. Those who come together in the form of a society is a congregation. Mm-hmm. Those who come together as a congregation form what? The body of the congregation. So when Pantera as a private society establishes its law form and its jurisdiction, we also establish our own court, as a society is fully empowered to do. And that court is called the court of the ecclesia. And that ecclesia is the living bodies of living men and women and children who have walked out of the death cult of the matrix and walked into life and have standing on the land as living beings, as opposed to dead franchises attached to bonded debt and monetized debt perpetually forever. Mm-hmm. So it's a living body. It is those who have chosen to set themselves apart, which means to walk out of the matrix Babylonian system of bondage. That is the fundamental definition of it. So it affords us or gives us two things. By definition, and we can define it any way we want, because the word jurisdiction means the words of the law. So in any given jurisdiction, you have the authority to define words as you wish. So at the same time, it is valid to call it an ecclesiastical body politic, and it has the same protections and immunities as any ecclesiastical body on the planet. Just as a society, we have the same fundamental capacities as any other society on the planet. And so we are ecclesiastical, but we are not a religious body.
But it is a protection then. It's a protection mechanism.
It's absolutely that. It's absolutely it. And so, but it's not using the term, speciously or spuriously in terms of saying, well, we're this and because we can claim freedom of religion. No, it's fundamental that it is what it is. And I've used this directly with the FBI, the SEC, the IRS, and so forth. And I asked them, what is your authority to, one, impair the right of private contract? What is your authority to impair the right of private congregation? What is your authority to impair the right of an ecclesiastical body that you do not have a contractual or jurisdictional relationship with? And their answer is usually silence. And if they do say anything, they just say, I don't have that authority. So it protects us. And there's a lot more to understand behind it and underneath it. But it doesn't mean people, if they become a member, are becoming a member of a religious society, because that's not what we are.
No, well, thank you for that answer, and it was brilliantly put, and it shows that, I mean, I've heard the word ecclesiastical used many times, and it's not always to do with churches and congregations specifically. So that's great that you said that. You said you've got a holographic mind, Ken, and we're coming to the end now of the interview. But do you think that we'll need the whole year of monthly interviews to get through this information, or do you think we can ramp it up a little bit maybe and see each other a bit more often, as they say?
Yeah. Well, that's a matter of schedule. We'll have to see when we can fit it in. But but if we said once a month for a year, we started on the 1st, so we'd have 13 sessions by the end of the year.
That's pretty good. That's pretty good. And also, I do want people to move forward and to grab this opportunity and learn as much as they can, and then become part of the Panterra Doro Society.
Yes. Yeah. So, but to answer your question, what I was saying, would we have enough to talk about and fill in all the pieces of the holographic picture of what exists in my mind in 13 sessions? Well, yeah, we wouldn't be bored. We'd have a lot to talk about. Can we do it more expeditiously? Sure. But, there's vast directions we can go. Once we've built the foundation of understanding the framework of what we've talked about so far in the 2 sessions, then we go to the next level and the next level, which is, within that framework, remember the house, the foundation, the framework, we are going to be actively mobilizing to build the global media platform and numerous other things. So there is a vast amount of things that you and I can talk about, and you're very well versed and knowledgeable and once you get into Gemstone, you're going to learn more and then have more advanced questions. So maintaining or continuing this dialogue with you and I to share with your listeners, we have plenty we could do for 11 more sessions.
For this session, Ken Scott from gemstoneuniversity.org and Pantera, and that's with R, panterapca.org. It's flown again, obviously, the time. It's been an absolute pleasure. I really apologise that I couldn't get into your website.
Don't do that. Now we have one dangling question that I said we'd return to, which we can do and wrap it up, or we could, put it on pause and start with it next time.
Well, it's entirely up to you if you'd like to do it.
You asked what is equity.
Yes.
Remember that?
I do.
Okay.
Right.
Well, let me ask you a question. Are you familiar with, do you have knowledge about trust and estate law at all?
Very little would be the best way to put it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, let me ask you, what do you understand a trust to be?
Well, okay. I can give you an analogy of what I would think a trust is. Probably the best way. A grouping of people together. Okay, a community, if you like. I'll give an example of insuring your car here in Ireland. If you have a trust of 5,000 people all paying fiat currency of 500 quid or so each, you'd have a slush fund of 1 million, which you could then use as a trust for those people who are part of that trust. If I'm explaining this wrong, do interject. And they are able to use that million, if you like, in the background as insurance for their car through their trust. So that's just one example of a trust.
Yeah.
There are many.
Well, what you've just described is more of a private association,
Okay.
Or a cooperative. It's actually really a form of a society. That it's a form of a group of people with a common purpose who come together to fulfill that purpose in association, and they basically are self-insuring by contributing X number of dollars or quid or euros or whatever to fund the association. Those funds are held in trust. They're not accessible by the members, and they're held there to function as a self-insuring mechanism for the members of the association. So that's what you have described.
That's what I described. Yeah.
And in a classic sense, a trust is where one individual, or it could be a entity or several who come together, but just say one man who comes forward and creates a form of a pledge, if we would call it that, a legal document that binds the instructions that he wishes to create and attaches those instructions to property that he wishes to put into trust. And when he does that in a trust form, standard trust form is to split the title. And those two titles are legal title and equitable or equity title. And when you do that in trust form, you assign or appoint the holder of the legal title as the trustee. And then you name the person or the group who is going to get the benefit of the property that's going to legally be held in trust by the trustee, and that would be called the beneficiary. And the interest that the beneficiary has is called equity, the value of the trust or the property inside the trust. Many variations on that, but that's the basic, that's trust form. So there's a trustor who creates the trust, appoints a trustee who gets legal title and has legal control over the property, and then the beneficiary. And the standard classic, of course, is a man and a wife come together and they've lived their life and they've got some assets and they're getting on and they know they're going to pass away soon. They want to leave the assets to their 4 children, so they create them with 4 units or 25% interest each as beneficiaries, and they go to a bank or a lawyer and they appoint that banker lawyer as a trustee who has to follow the rules and the instructions that they leave of how that's going to happen, and then how the beneficiaries are going to receive the equity. So that's called a split title, because you're splitting the title. Okay. If we were vested with full title in something, we would have the legal control over something and we would have the beneficial rights to receive the equity. And so this is basically trust form, trust law. And when you're talking about property, all property is held in this world in an estate. So estates control property, and they have a similar relationship to how an estate is settled, has an administrator or an executor who is essentially the trustee and the beneficiary. And this is, I'm not going to go into it more in depth here because we're wrapping up our time. But this is one of the fundamentals that we teach, because understanding how trusts work, understanding how estates work, this is fundamental to understanding how we think we own things, but we actually don't, because the estate that holds our name and all the property attached to the name, we abandon that estate, and by the function of abandonment and salvage of property, it reverts to the state, the governing body called the state, and essentially all those players out there, the policemen and the judges and the tax people and et cetera, millions of bureaucratic players, they all are functionaries or agents or officers of the state, acting as executor, managing the estate of your property. And you are the beneficiary, but you don't really actually get the ultimate equity of it. And, this is kind of a complex description, but it gets down to your question, what really is equity? And probably what we should do is just leave this where I've just set it up here, and then let's start next conversation. What is equity? What is an estate? What is a trust? What happens when you abandon an estate? How can you reclaim the estate? How can you, in effect, collapse the split titles so that you can have true title to your body to start with? Because our bodies are actually pledged property in an estate as a trust that we actually don't have control over, because the state itself has legal title and they can do whatever they want within the rules of public policy. And that's why the state can implement mandatory rules of how we can deal with our body or our children's body, with mandatory vaccines or mandatory drugs or mandatory this, that, and the other. That basically is a form of death and dying rather than, health and living. And people are constantly, screaming fraud and how can they do this, and mandatory vaccinations and 5G and everything. Well, it's because our body is part of the property of this estate that we don't actually have legal title or control over. So that's a good place to end.
It is.
And then a good place to pick up and begin next time we talk.
It is. Ken, that's brilliant. I just want to say to anyone that's listening up to this point, if you have any questions, obviously you've now heard that Ken's going to be on the show, in the near future, over the next couple of months, the next few months, maybe the whole year. So if you've got any questions, you can email me, spmaguire@aircom.net, EIRCOM.net. So spmaguire@aircom.net. You can contact me on Facebook, Sean P. Maguire on Facebook. I've got the Irish flag as my 21st of January, Independence Day, as my picture. And please, if you know me personally, mobile text, whatever you want to do, send me a message on Skype, Sean.Maguire651. Basically, I'm looking for as many questions from you guys out there, because it's not just me. I'd love for you guys to get involved, and maybe I'll have those questions, Ken, ready for your next interview that you have with me. But if timing is right and all the rest of it, you might even be on a live show maybe, and have the chat room and people being able to call in, etc.
Yeah, well, we'll do both. I mean, have people, everybody who's listening, send in your questions in one of those ways, and we'll address them if we have to do a pre-recorded next time. But sooner or later, we'll do one or a couple of live shows where we can do on-the-air Q&A, and I really enjoy doing that. It's great to interact and get questions answered. And basically, we're going to keep doing this until you throw tomatoes at us or we've done it all. And because this is going to be an extraordinary year. There's going to be a lot to share. So far in these two sessions, we've just been laying the foundation. And we'll go from here with your questions and just have a good time and see where we go.
Brilliant. So Ken Scott, thank you so much for coming back on Out of the Bag.
Okay, thanks. I appreciate it.
Thank you. And welcome back to Out of the Bag. This is Sean Maguire live on Healing Oracle Radio and People's Internet Radio. And that was my interview with Ken Scott, co-founder of the Panterra Private Contract Association and, of course, Gemstone University. Absolutely fantastic stuff. I'm really interested myself in maybe ungripping myself from this psychopathic matrix. The Media Alliance concept is fantastic. I hope we're involved with that. And if you want to get involved, all the details were in the interview. And thank you so much, Ken Scott, for the first 2 hours. Brilliant stuff. And I hope that we're going to be on again fairly soon with Ken, maybe detailing step by step how to go through the process. That would be wonderful. So get your questions in, any questions you have, and I'll put them to Ken. Thanks so much, Ken, for that 2 hours.